all good things must come to an end. But when exactly does that end come? What motivates you? What drives you? Do you keep believing in yourself? Or do you just go out on a high and enjoy the moment while it lasts? All philosophical terminology and jargon that you seldom see out of the likes of me. But that is a legitimate question that is starting to simmer within the confines of Formula One land. And frankly, there does need to be an open, honest conversation here with the driver in question, because their time has come and gone. And no matter how popular they may be, their position in the sport right now is untenable. And we all know exactly who this pertains to. You guessed it. Lance Stroll. He's an easy target. As long as the nepotism carries on, so too will the diet slander. Of course, you know this video is not dedicated to that lovable chicane. I assume y'all are literate enough to be able to read the title, and that if you could, I imagine what the general reaction would have been.
You are by far the dumbest, most pathetic piece of maggot-eating shit.
Yeah, I know. Who the hell are we to judge the 7-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton over whether he has it anymore or not? Whether he would last in that Ferrari beyond the 2 years that he has on his contract? We dare even contemplate whether this could be Lewis Hamilton's final chapter in Formula One. Well, there is quite a bit to unpack here and a few tough questions that we have got to ask of ourselves. So with that said, here we go. 12 months ago, when the earth-shattering announcement of Lewis joining Ferrari was made public, it set off unprecedented levels of hype and expectation. The reality is that no driver signing has ever garnered as much attention as this did, and part of it was down to the fact that no one saw it coming. Lewis had been a part of the Mercedes family since before the turn of the century. It was one of those partnerships that you could just never imagine seeing being broken, even if that team in particular was Ferrari, the creme de la creme. The one team that unequivocally every driver in the world wants to race with at least once. Because Ferrari is Formula One, and Formula One is Ferrari. To be a Ferrari Formula One driver not only puts you in amongst an elite list of drivers, but it earns you a special status in amongst the Tifosi and in the whole nation of Italia. Lewis made it clear a lot of times that he would like to race with the team, and there were persistent rumors over the years, various flashpoints that made us go, huh? Could this happen? But they all seemed to fade away long before we remembered that TikTok was a shite place to get your news from, and we all kind of just let it go, dismissed it. This team driver combo that will long be a what could have been than what will be. That was until early 2024 when Chris Medlin began to report on it, and we all started to think, wait, hold up, we're about to eat here. Within hours of these reports, the official statement came out, and hey presto, buongiorno, Lewis. So in a lot of ways, it surprised all of us. The biggest marquee driver going to the biggest marquee team on the grid was a match made in heaven, or at least it would have been in 2004, when Ferrari was indomitable. It ain't quite that anymore, but surely Lewis coming in will change all of that, right? Well, Ferrari have gone to great lengths to accommodate Lewis on his arrival at Maranello. And I mean, what else were you expecting? For Ferrari to tell him to sit in the corner and shut up until they need him? No, that is what Italian Jesus is there for. If you're gonna spend millions upon millions for the world's most famous and successful F1 driver to drive your car, you're not gonna have him fend for himself now, aren't you? He'll be joining a Ferrari that is spearheaded by Frederic Vasseur, who he had previously enjoyed success with, winning the GP2 championship in 2006 together at ART Grand Prix. The importance of the driver-team principal dynamic cannot be overstated, because a good relationship between the two could extract the best out of the driver and the team itself. So to have two people familiar with each other, as driven as each other, and quite fond of each other, there's a very good reason for people to be optimistic about the outcome of this relationship, even as much as the steering wheel has been changed, with adjusted button placements and redesigned pedals on the back to more closely resemble that of which he had become so used to at Mercedes. Does this make the car go faster? Well, no, but comfort, familiarity, and vibes is worth at least 10 seconds a lap, and that is a real science. Maybe. Now, changes made to accommodate star drivers is nothing new to Ferrari. They've done it before in the past, and they'll continue to do it going forward because it's only logical. But aside from personal recommendations with regards to brake pedal adjustments and steering wheel modifications, all of which are virtually standard procedure for most new driver arrivals at most teams, this narrative that Lewis could single-handedly change the scope and direction of Ferrari is ignorant. One dude is not going to change a Formula 1 team on their own for the better, and they sure as hell would not be able to do that overnight. When Lewis won his second World Championship in 2014, it wasn't just this overnight deal where he walked into the team and whoa, Nelly, new champion. It took years of development work from Rosberg, from Schumacher, great leadership from the bridge of the ship, hard work from those on the development side, endless quantities of resources, and a head start in the power unit department that all merged together to just give Lewis the platform to succeed. Once he got it, he did knock it out of the park, ran, caught the ball himself, and shoved it up the arse of all of his detractors. But it is and was a team game here, and there is not and has never been this one magic man to just spin a team's form around. It is also worth mentioning that technical feedback has never been Lewis's strong point. It's not as if he can't do it at all, but if there are fundamental issues in the car, it's never been an easy road back for him or the team, especially if his teammate is equally at sea in car development. And from early season testing, the Ferrari SF25 appears to harbor handling characteristics that Lewis himself had struggled with in last year's Mercedes. But how much of that is down to what he personally wants from the car, what he can cope with, and how much of that is down to a potential decline due to his age? Several drivers, including purportedly mortal enemy Max Verstappen, have remarked that Lewis will never lose it. And Lewis himself said, "You can't compare me to another 40-year-old past or present Formula 1 driver in history, because they are nothing like me." And that's a fair argument. But then he also personally lamented his own performances at the end of last year. And then the Totinator came out and talked about a driver's shelf life, which is a perfectly fair conversation to have, as at some point, whether you're 30 or you're 90, there does come a point where you're just not as good as you were as a young'un. So the age thing is definitely there. It's inescapable, as much as Lewis seems to be attempting to outrun it. And especially in this sport, where the idea that age eventually starts working against you, and typically that does happen in your 40s, which Lewis has just reached. However, there is more than one example in the history of motor racing that shatters this age narrative entirely. The IndyCar series doesn't quite have the same social standing as Formula 1 does. I'm not going to pretend that it does. But anybody who knows wheel will tell you that the talent pool is a hell of a lot deeper than the days where Michael Schumacher likened it to a zoo. Sure, not everyone here is a world-class talent, and Marcus Ericsson winning a race or two, yeah, that's a tad bit of a blemish. But the point is that to stay at the top in this game, to be a constant presence in the championship hunt, you've got to have a whole lot of everything to succeed, especially today. Since he entered the championship in 2001, Scott Dixon has been the benchmark for all those that have followed. He may not have always been the fastest, and that is becoming more prevalent as the years draw on, but in every single damn race, he will always deliver. He could qualify a car in P17, where most drivers would probably stay there or thereabouts come the end of the race. But in the case of Scott Dixon, when you look at the leaderboard with 10 laps to go, almost as if by magic, you'll see that he would have gone from P17 at the start to P1 and 20 seconds in the lead. And we'd all be left thinking, wait, how the hell did you get there? His racecraft is beyond reproach, almost second to none. Although the last few years, there has been some thought that, he's 44 years old now. He old, by race driver standards anyway. It just doesn't seem that he's as potent as years gone by. Maybe he just doesn't have it anymore. And I did mention this myself in a video a couple of weeks ago. And then 1 week later, at the season opener in Florida, in his 22nd year of IndyCar racing, he put on a clinic and damn nearly won the race despite having no radio comms. Or if IndyCar ain't quite your flavor, if you're an F1 elitist and you're unwilling to broaden your horizons, we have Fernando Alonso still running around at the ripe young age of 43, with his performances over the last couple of years suggesting that there's no reason to suggest that he's on the way out. He has rarely been vanquished by a teammate ever since he returned a few years ago, even if his current teammate is a bit but you get the feeling that every time he goes out, he maximizes what that car is capable of. And if you're not allergic to history and you want to stay with Formula 1 here, Juan Manuel Fangio won his 5th World Championship in his final season of Formula 1 at the age of 46. And at that age, he was driving some of his best races, which means that he was driving some of Formula 1's best races. So this narrative that rolling over into your 40s would automatically make you washed in mid doesn't really hold water. But of course, one size does not fit all. The whole reason why there's been questions surrounding Lewis's form and future has been down to the last few seasons. Ever since the regulation changes and the performance struggles struggles with the Mercedes cars. At the start of it all in 2022, you could be forgiven for pinning the blame of it all on the woeful W13, the mechanical embodiment of Andrea de Cesaris, where it would develop a twitch midway through a corner and rearrange itself by lurching into a wall. Although in the head-to-head battle, while miles closer than anything Valtteri Bottas ever gave him, he did beat George Russell in most metrics, save for stuff like the overall driver standings, but when has that ever mattered? Most reasonable people with cognitive function, or eyes, would tell you that Lewis was the better driver that season. Although in 2023, things did start to change ever so slightly in that team. The stats suggested a comprehensive Lewis victory over George, but it was visibly evident that the pendulum was beginning to swing, that George was engrossing himself in the team ever more so as time went on, and that he was being looked at as the wave of the future. Finally, in 2024, it was clear throughout the vast majority of the year that George was the better driver in that team. Now, undeniably part of it was down to favor being shifted toward George after Lewis's departure for Ferrari was announced so early on in the year. And let's be logical here, any sane team principal would favor a driver who will be there next year and not give away pertinent secrets to a dude who is going over to the mortal enemy. But what was disconcerting was that for the large part, Lewis did lack the potency that we saw from him in years gone by. Sure, he did nab 2 Grand Prix victories, and like Scott Dixon, there were still times where we had to double take that leaderboard as it appeared that once again he was being the Houdini of Formula 1, but the mid races far outweighed the good ones. This just wasn't the Lewis that we were used to seeing, and at various points during the year, self-doubt was starting to creep in, and he himself was questioning whether he still had it in him to win. And that is a problem, because a racing driver's psyche does matter a lot. It can hinder performances if damaged, but can elevate them if they're on a high. Multiple F1 personnel and pundits are also curious as to the handling characteristics of the Ferrari SF25 that Lewis will be driving this year, and whether it retains the twitchiness from last year, which is also kind of a trait that he struggled with in the last 3 Mercedes cars. Lewis does prefer a more benign car that he can use to maximize his results with, which is also a little bit strange given how much he seemed to like the pointy cars of the late 2000s. But there's something else as well. His new teammate this year, Charles Leclerc, will likely end up being a bigger test for him than whatever the car is going to end up throwing at him, and perhaps the toughest teammate he has or will ever have in his F1 career. And you get the sense that he knows that, given that he proclaimed that he and Charles together make up one of, if not the best F1 driver pairing in all of history, which is, I'm not too sure about that one, bruh. Charles has just come off a season where, discounting the Flying Dutchman, a lot of people regarded him as the best driver on the grid, some even calling him the fastest driver on outright pace. And few do believe that Lewis would be able to vanquish him in qualifying, at least on a regular basis. Sure, Lewis's racecraft is spellbinding, but Charles also proved last year to have exceptional racecraft as well, digging himself out of a rut time and again, and maximizing results whenever he didn't start the race down the pack with the peasants and the Saubers. Given the accommodating nature of Ferrari, Lewis's integration at the team likely won't be as big of a hurdle as we initially thought, but the question now is, can he usurp Charles Leclerc in the pecking order at Maranello, especially given Charles' status at that team for the last few years, how he knows that team inside and out, and that while questions linger over Lewis's pace, Charles' just seems to get better every year. Of course, providing tangible evidence to support an argument here is futile. A lot of what would make or break Lewis's run at Ferrari lies in the intangibles, what fate decides for him in the coming months. Perhaps the most crucial thing is not necessarily what comes of this year, but of next year. If he ends up not liking the new set of regulations that are to come, and if Charles can establish himself as the better driver in the team irrefutably, the self-doubt prevalent throughout last year could very well come back, and it may entice Lewis to hang up the helmet at the end of 2026. Alternatively, if it works the other way round, there'd be no reason for him to stop. After all, he did make mention that he could potentially go on for another 10 years, and that he doesn't give a crap about what some bozo on the internet or old guy on a Brazilian plantation has to say about his future and his career, and that's totally fine and that's totally fair. It's not for us to decide after all, I'm just making a best guess here. Sometimes though, that shit ain't even for him to decide. It kinda reminds me of that quote from Cars 3.
You know, I asked my uncle once how I'd know when it was time to stop. You know what he said? The youngsters will tell you.
Whatever transpires though, be it the best case or worst case scenario, it does feel like we're on the home stretch of Lewis's career in some way, shape or form. And if Ferrari doesn't work out for him, a move back to Mercedes or even McLaren or another team entirely seems very unlikely. Ferrari is almost certainly where Lewis will round out his career whenever it happens. You would be an idiot and a moron if 5 years ago you would even contemplate of Lewis retiring, because he seemed to be at the height of his powers. He seemed indomitable, flat out unbeatable, especially if he had the car underneath underneath him. But even in the knowledge that he didn't have the car in the last few years, there's still too much doubt lingering when you factor in everything else. The heightened talent levels of his teammates, and other new factors such as integrating at a new team, which provides Lewis with a new battle year in and year out. Therefore, this does seem to be Act 3 of Lewis's career, the final chapter. It's not to say that he's washed or that he don't got it anymore. I am, after all, predicting a podium in his very first race, and at least 2 more wins before he pieces out. He can still perform magic time and again, and even if none of that happens, none of it will impact his legacy. Although if he does win an 8th World Championship with the Scuderia, even though I personally don't think it will happen, it would put him in a place so unassailable in the pantheon of F1 drivers that his status as the GOAT would be undeniable and likely untouchable as long as the sport exists. But we do have to be realistic here. People have held out similar hopes for other driver transfers, and a lot of them failed to bear fruit. And while Lewis is built different, you can never take anything as a given. Only that after nearly 20 years of racing in Formula 1, we're a hell of a lot closer to his retirement than his debut. And whether it happens next year, or 5 years, or 10 years from now, there will soon come a point where the book will close on his career as the final chapter of Lewis Hamilton comes to an end, as all good things must come to an end. It's all just a matter of what motivates Lewis and what drives him, and when both of those run out. He may not be everyone's cup of tea, but you have got to appreciate talent and greatness while it's there. You don't know what you've lost until it's gone, so save that wanton slander for those who deserve it, like, say, Lance Stroll.
I get excited when you're not biased. Love is in my head, I won't stop trying. I get excited when you're not biased. Love is in my head, I won't stop trying.